Welcome to the May Citizens Climate Lobby call. My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby board, and I'll be hosting today's call. What I'll be doing over the course of the day, first is we'll have our two guests from American Forests. American Forests, really important organization, one nation under trees. Healthy forests are our pathway to slowing climate change and advancing social equity. Such a beautiful statement, and so we're lucky to have them. After we hear from our guests today, we're going to be going over what we're inviting you to do this month, followed by some of the interesting things that are happening both domestically and with our international work. And then the last thing I want to do today is talk a little bit about the June conference. Some of you will be attending live, some of you will be attending virtually. There are some really important features that I want to point to. I think there's some particularly important talks this round, so I wanted to take some time and focus on that. One of the things I like to do is tell our guests a little bit about the people they're speaking to. And there's a lot of things that I'll say, but I'll just start with that these people are very active. So I just want to touch on a few of the things that they did this month. The first one actually stretches a little bit more than a month. We started this action when Russia invaded Ukraine. We created a commitment to have 40,000 people contact their members of Congress and the president. And to date, 42,241 people have made contact with their member of Congress and the president. We also made a commitment to do 500 events. That would be a combination of outreach events, things like tabling, presentations, et cetera. And so far, 897 events have happened. And really remarkably, for an organization that has not been able to table for 2 years, 256 tabling events. And so that's been great to be out there in the field again. There was also 3 outreach tours, one in Tennessee and Kentucky, one in Mississippi, one in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada. And that ended up with a total of 76 outreach events that happened in the month of April also. In addition to that, our volunteers got 97 op-eds published and 200 letters to the editor. Regarding our op-eds, over 80% of the op-eds that we submit get published by newspapers, and particularly in the month of April, when so many people are competing for space during Earth Month. To have over 90% is really remarkable. And for everybody who submitted, thank you. And a particular shout out to Charlotte Ward and our comms department for giving us such great material to work with. So American Forests is the oldest nonprofit conservation group in the United States. And we're really lucky to have 2 guests today. We have Jad Daley, who's the president and CEO, and Joel Pannell, who is the vice president of Urban Forestry. So gentlemen, welcome. So great to have you. And hopefully there'll be some time for some Q&A after your opening statement, and we'll be monitoring that so you don't have to keep an eye out for those questions. We'll make sure that we keep an eye out for them.
Mark, thanks so much. It's such a joy to be with all of you today. Thank you so much for the work that you do. It was incredibly inspiring to watch the video, and I've had a front row seat as a brother-in-law to Sam Daly Harris to watch the growth of Citizens Climate Lobby over the years, and so know about the kinds of mind-blowing statistics that Mark just shared about the effectiveness that you all have and the passion that you bring to this work, that you're here on a Saturday afternoon giving you your time to act on climate change. So thank you for what you do. We're inspired by you, and we're incredibly grateful, Joel and myself, to have a little bit of time with you today to talk about what we think is the profound role that trees and forests can play in advancing climate action and climate justice. Just a quick check. Can everyone see my screen now? Fantastic. Yes. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to do the movie trailer, not the movie. We'd like to talk for like an hour and 25 minutes about all these things, but we want to give you just enough that hopefully we can have a second date. So, hopefully what we want to try to do is kind of take you over the treetops of the key issues here on the intersections of forest with climate action and climate justice, and including some of the policy opportunities, and then see what that brings out in the question and answer, and hopefully that sets up ways that we can work together going forward. So the first thing is, I think you kind of got to know who you're dealing with here. And so I just want to speak personally. Why am I here? Why did I come to American Forests 5 years ago to pivot the nation's oldest forest conservation organization, 147 years young at this point, to wholly focus on climate change and social equity and the intersection of the two. My journey started with reading The End of Nature right when it came out, actually more than 30 years ago. I went out and sold my car. I made some big decisions in my life that I was going to live climate action every day, and nothing's changed. I've been on it throughout the different twists and turns in my career. And my other great inspiration is that woman you see there on the right. That's the Reverend Patty Daley, 85 years young, and she's still rocking it, working in the most socially disadvantaged places she can find as a reverend, and ministering to people who need her the most. And that for me has just created this deep commitment to social and racial equity and justice as a foundation for my life. And so American Forests, I can promise you, this is not an organization that cares about trees and suddenly latched on to climate change and social equity. We're not going to be happy if we succeed on something with forests and it doesn't end up saving our climate and delivering real change in social and racial equity and justice in this country. And that's a team that you look at there. We've grown fourfold in about 4 years, is filled with people who just wake up every single day, and they're just like you. They live and die doing everything they possibly can on these issues, and the way that they come together. And so just know that our metrics for success are the same as your metrics for success. And look, the great thing about it is we don't have to make trees and forests a climate change solution. They actually already are. Here in the United States, our forests and forest products, which by the way store carbon and also have other greenhouse gas benefits because they're actually more energy efficient to manufacture than materials like cement and steel, together provide a net carbon sink of about 16% of our carbon dioxide emissions from burning fossil fuels. So a really important climate change benefit that we're already getting from our trees and forest products here in the United States. But that's a starting point. And the science tells us that if we don't do anything, that's actually going to start going down quite precipitously, thanks to things like wildfire and actually just the impact of climate change on forests is one of the biggest reasons why that climate benefit will start to erode if we don't do something. So part of what we have to do is keep our forests healthy and resilient in the face of climate change. We call that carbon defense, but we can also expand our forest ability to naturally take in carbon dioxide, sequester it is the actual term of art. And so I want to talk about just a couple of examples of what this carbon offense and carbon defense, if you will, looks like to see if we can go from that 16% and at least hold the line, but maybe make it a lot more. And there's some science that suggests that we could potentially as much as double or nearly double that climate change benefit that we're getting from our trees and forests right now. So here's a great example of the carbon offense side. And look, there's some pretty simple science at work. That one tree that you see there on the left, we know from our work with the US Forest Service, we've done the analysis, the average tree in the United States over its lifetime is going to sequester about 0.62 of a ton of carbon. So it's carbon dioxide, excuse me. So it's each one of these trees, each tree we add to the landscape is essentially an additional carbon removal device. Now, to expand on that, it can't just be more trees, it has to be the right kinds of trees in the ecologically appropriate places. But we've done that analysis, this reforestation hub that you see here on the right. And this is a tool you can go out and check it out yourself. It goes county by county across the entire United States. And this is a tool we built with the Nature Conservancy that shows exactly where we can add trees, where we should add trees to increase this natural carbon capture. And it actually quantifies for you how much additional carbon capture we'll get in each of these different locations and each of these different types of adding trees to the landscape, whether it's urban forests or agroforestry, adding trees to farms and ranches, or whether we're talking about, for example, reforesting burned over landscapes. We mapped all of it. And so you can go in there and explore that and talk to your members of Congress about opportunities to bring more trees onto the landscape. And if you add it all together, by our analysis, we can increase carbon capture in our forests by more than 40% just by maximizing this more trees opportunity. Well, what about this carbon defense? And as I alluded to earlier, our forests are under immense stress from climate change, and wildfire is the one that you probably see are most aware of. But actually, a lot of times wildfire follows on other ways in which climate change is impacting our forests, like tree mortality. I mean, California, more than 50 million trees have died in just the last decade alone, driven by climate stresses, just for example. And so there are all sorts of ways in which climate change is essentially undermining forest health, and then those unhealthy forests are more prone to burn. So counterintuitive though it might be, there are some places where we actually need to subtract more trees from the landscape, ideally turning them into forest products where appropriate, so we could store that carbon that we've taken off the landscape. But by actually having fewer trees, in some cases, we're going to get a more stable carbon sink over the long term, and the net gain for our climate can be very, very substantial. You actually have some Western states that have tipped to a net source of carbon from their forests because they're not doing this kind of work to prevent mortality in the forest and to prevent wildfire. So I want to shift now to the intersection of trees and climate justice, because we don't just need trees to help us slow climate change, but we need trees to protect us from climate change. And that starts with protecting us from the incredible threat of extreme heat in our cities. This map that you see here, or the picture that you see here on the left and the map you see here on the right, reveals a fundamental reality in our cities, which is that a map of trees is also a map of income and a map of race in ways that transcend income. And that has life or death implications in our city. Look, already 12,000 people per year die from extreme heat in the United States alone. That's the #1 loss of life from extreme weather, which a lot of people don't know that. That number is predicted to get to 100,000 by the end of the century. And we know that from great research from Duke University. And those deaths are going to be concentrated in neighborhoods that lack tree cover, where people don't have air conditioning to cool their homes. They might not have the best healthcare plans, or might have pre-existing health conditions. And so lower income communities, communities of color that already face different kinds of barriers and disinvestment are the ones that are at the greatest risk. And what we know from a tool we created called Tree Equity Score is that it is systemic across the country, that a map of trees is a map of income and a map of race and ways that transcend income. And in fact, just to make the point, majority communities of color have 33% less tree canopy on average, regardless of income in the United States. So you can check this out for yourself. Don't take my word for it. Tree Equity Score is as easy to use as your smartphone. You can jump on there right now. You have permission to multitask and just enter your town. And what Tree Equity Score lets you do is see citywide some of these tree inequities in your community. It lets you actually go neighborhood by neighborhood and see exactly where you have tree inequities, and shows you both where there's lacking tree cover, but also things like the percentage of people of color, age distribution, health status, actual urban heat island in those communities, as well as economic indicators. So we can see where the lack of trees is having the greatest impact on people's vulnerability to climate change. And then the same tool actually lets you run a scenario to see, well, hey, if I added this many more trees to my community, if I wanted every tree neighborhood in my community to have equitable tree cover, what would the benefits be? How much would we do in terms of cleaning the air and better protecting people from extreme heat and those kinds of things? So we hope this is a powerful tool for you to become an advocate for tree equity as a way to more equitably protect people in our cities from climate change. But the good news is that this is a climate justice solution that's also actually a climate action solution. We don't have to choose. The same action is going to both protect people from climate change more equitably, but also it's going to help slow climate change. And urban trees not only are a surprisingly big part of the carbon capture in trees and forests in the United States, 130 million metric tons of CO2 per year, which is almost 20% of the carbon capture in America's trees and forests, is actually happening in our cities and towns. But those same trees also save a whole lot of energy for heating and cooling. And so there's kind of another hidden greenhouse gas savings and financial savings in these same trees. And then lastly, the great thing about this work of tree equity, as we all understand that the underlying inequities in our cities are so often economic. And so we have an incredible opportunity in planting more trees in those neighborhoods that need them the most, better caring for trees in those neighborhoods that are more frequently losing them. To create jobs in the process. And by our research, 25.7 jobs for every $1 million that we invest in creating tree equity in our cities. And so in that sense, we can create climate action, climate justice, and green jobs in one fell swoop. And that's why our organization is all in on asking for unprecedented public and private investment in this fantastic multi-benefit climate change solution. So with that said, let me turn it over to my colleague, Joel Pannell, who will speak about some of the fantastic bipartisan policy opportunities and momentum to invest in those kinds of climate opportunities.
So no, I just said thank you, Jad, and thank you, the Citizens Climate Lobby, for having us. It's a rare occasion where I'm happy to be joining my boss on a Saturday afternoon, just because this topic is so important. And just think you just saw a little glimpse of the passion that Jad has for this issue and leading. Just proud to work for an organization that's leading on these issues in a substantial way. And so I want to talk a little bit about some recent legislative victories, as well as some opportunities to build further upon that to really realize the full benefits of trees as a natural climate solution. And as I do that, I do want to underscore sort of two really important points. So number one is that trees are a proven bipartisan climate solution. I know that I'm preaching to the choir, and you all know that, but just to any narratives that are out there about this being a partisan issue just are simply untrue. We can have healthy debates about scale of investment and how to pay for things, but there is no debate on trees and forests as a healthy climate solution for every community in the country, rural, urban, suburban, and everywhere in between. And as evidence of that, we have the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which is now the law of the land. And so there were several significant victories. The Replant Act that I'll talk a little bit more talk about in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But we know that we have Senator Manchin as the chair of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, who's working on bipartisan legislation right now. We have the ARCS Act, we have the Growing Climate Solutions Act that I know you all have been very involved with. And so we have examples of these bipartisan solutions. On the urban forestry side, there's about a dozen bills right now that would scale up federal investment in urban community forestry. Right now, we have one federal program at the Forest Service dedicated to that. But these bills would do that through various agencies, HUD, DOT, Department of Energy, and others. And 3 of those bills are actually very bipartisan. 2 are led currently by Republicans that include language for prioritizing funding in areas that are typically underserved, as well as areas of low tree or environmental equity. So tree equity, you're hearing from me, tree equity is a bipartisan climate solution. Next slide, please. And so the second point I wanted to make was that tree equity is environmental justice. And so, I know some people have asked, well, what's the connection between tree equity and environmental climate justice? The connection is that tree equity is environmental justice. And the current administration has, stated priorities on climate, health, and equity. And tree equity, again, just sits perfectly at the intersection of all these issues. And so there's lots of opportunities that we are currently working on to advance tree equity at federal agencies now, through the Justice 40 Initiative, through the Interagency Working Group on Extreme Heat that we co-developed a guide that the Forest Service released on using tree cover to combat urban heat islands. That was part of that announcement on the Interagency Working Group. And then just getting agencies, again, beyond the USDA and the Forest Service, really getting them skin in the game in terms of how they're using trees as a natural climate solution. Next slide, please. And so one of the ways that we're doing that is through advocating for the Healthy Streets program. So this is a program that was newly authorized in the bipartisan infrastructure bill. It was not funded, but it's authorized at $100 million annually for grants to communities to really invest in their tree canopy, tree assessments, and combining that with cool pavement strategies to really cool cities that are suffering the most from climate change. Jad and many of my colleagues were in Phoenix about 2 weeks ago. Phoenix is is the first major U.S. city to really publicly commit to tree equity. They've got an amazing cool corridor program where, again, when Jad and my colleagues were out there a couple of weeks ago, they were planting trees in a heavily Latino, heavily low-income community that's literally, baking in the sun, one of the hottest cities in the world, and has realized that trees are just a more effective climate solution than any of the other things that they can do. And so again, we really would love your support on getting that Healthy Streets program funded. And there's a couple of opportunities to do that through the appropriations process this year, and we'll be staying with that. Next slide, please. And so one of the bipartisan bills that is out there is the Trees Act. It's bipartisan, it's bicameral. It's based on a very popular program in Sacramento, where the utility company there is providing free shade trees to private homeowners and others to really address cooling and utility cost issues. And so this is a bill that we would love to see get a little bit more traction and move through whatever legislative vehicle presents itself. Again, it's bipartisan and bicameral with Senator Booker and Senators Capito leading on the Senate side, and Representative Matsui, Representative McKinley, and others leading on the House side. Next slide, please. And I know I'm jumping back and forth a little bit, but one of the big legislative victories we had was in the Replant Act in the infrastructure bill. It created $2.5 billion for post-fire restoration. We actually believe that number is going to be significantly higher in terms of dollar value once everything is said and done. And so that, again, was just a really big win for us, or win for, I'm sorry, for the forestry community at large. There was more to do there. So it provides a lot of money to the National Forest System. It provides a little bit of money to the Department of Interior, who manages many of our public forests as well. And so there's a lot more to do there to make sure that that money gets to states, tribes, landowners, and others, so that we can, again, appropriate the funding in the right way to realize the full benefit of investments in climate smart forestry. And so we're really excited also to see things like the Trillion Trees Act, Urban Forestry Act, that again address these issues in a really critical and bipartisan way. Next slide, please. And so those, again, are just a few of the legislative vehicles that really emphasize the federal government partnering with private landowners and providing those financial incentives to actualize climate smart forestry. And again, just very grateful for what's already been done. We want to see if we can get some of these things over the finish line. So very interested in working with Citizens Climate Lobby on things like the Growing Climate Solutions Act that I know you all were instrumental in helping get passed very quickly in the Senate. And so hoping to get that across the finish line in the House and onto the president's desk. And that's just some of the things that we're looking at as ways to do that. And I think, again, because there's no debate that this is a bipartisan climate solution. There's no debate about the benefits that trees and forests bring to all communities of all sizes. And there's no debate about the climate, health, and economic benefits, again, that trees bring to all communities. And so we really are looking forward to working with everyone in a collaborative way to come up with those effective solutions for the country that are good policy. And so regardless of the politics or the process by which we get there, there's universal agreement that this is good policy. In most cases, it's non-regulatory policy that really, again, speaks to climate action that we can take now to have immediate benefits, and then also benefits for future generations. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Jad and let you wrap it up.
Yeah, and I'll just quick closing comment. I'm sorry we went a little longer than we had intended, but we get excited. I'm sorry, because it's so fun to share this with you all. And we know how passionate you are about the same issues. And so I'll leave it at this. Your opening nailed it. It's about climate hope. Climate despair, not getting us anywhere. We need hope. And one of the things that we think is really powerful about this work is everyone can participate. We've got governments to Girl Scouts. The Girl Scouts of the USA, literally, when they tried to figure out what they want to do on climate change, created the Girl Scout Tree Promise, which we're partnering with them on, to plant 5 million trees in the next 5 years to act on climate change, because it was something that they could actively participate in directly on the ground. And so we think that this movement from cities to wilderness offers chances for people to touch in and be part of the solution and get climate hope and get momentum, and let that feed into the broader climate movement and all the things that we need to do. So we'll stop there, and just can't wait to get any of your thoughts and questions. And again, really hope that we can keep this collaboration going forward and support each other's work in the greatest ways possible.
Yeah, so do we. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Flannery, what kind of questions are you fielding so far?
All right, so our top upvoted question is from Kate. They're asking if you could comment on the growing population and the need to use farmland to grow food. So just in general, how do you think about land use questions and the need to also plant trees?
Boy, it's a fantastic question. And so I'm going to give a short answer, and then I'd love to follow up with interested folks on this. The good news is there are lots and lots of the tree opportunities on agricultural lands that actually don't reduce agricultural outputs, and in some cases even enhance them. Things like planting trees in the rows between crops, silvopasture, where you're adding trees onto ranch lands, which actually creates healthier ranch lands for the animals that are grazing there and those kinds of things. And so we're really focused on those win-win opportunities where we can actually have better agriculture and we can also have carbon positive farming by adding trees into the landscape.
That's great. Okay, we had a couple of questions about maintaining trees after they're planted. Is that something that American Forest has programs around?
110%. So Joel mentioned, let me start with the urban side. Joel mentioned this forestry guide that we created with the U.S. Forest Service for not just managing our urban forests better than ever, but to do it with an understanding of the climate stresses on our forests and how to maximize their resilience over the long term and all the benefits we need them to provide for climate justice, for public health, and those kinds of things. So we're really intent on that. And so with partner cities like Phoenix, for example, we're going very, very deep on getting that information and tools out to all the 50+ partner organizations, grassroots groups, all the way to the city agencies that are working together on it. So we're all using those exceptional forestry principles. And that's really the kind of shorthand for how we do it in every single place we're working, whether it's the campfire burn scar in California, where we're partnering with big federal agencies to restore that, or whether it's doing urban forestry for tree equity. We like to think of ourselves as woodwonks. We're into the geeky details of forestry, and we know we need to be if we're going to get the lasting outcomes that we're seeking from this investment that we're making in our trees and forests.
And Jed, if I could just add to that, we were limited on time, so we could spend a whole day talking to you as well about our Career Pathways program, but we know that the urban forestry sector is going to be growing by 10,000 or more jobs just in the next several years. And we really designed our Career Pathway program so that we're creating economic opportunities in the very communities that have been hit first and worst by climate change. And so that important work of making sure that those trees are maintained, established, and that they're going to grow into healthy urban canopy is something that we're really focused on very intentionally about creating jobs, workforce development opportunities, pre-employment, curriculum, wraparound services for people who have sort of systemic barriers to employment, working to do all of that so that we are addressing both that issue as well as the economic equity issues at the same time.
Wonderful. Well, you guys have come to the right place. The woodwonks have found the climate nerds on this call. Mark, do we have time for one more question?
We do, Flannery, thank you. Yeah.
Okay. We've had a few questions about wildfires in the West. How do you think about the growing threat of wildfires in the context of this work?
Oh, it's absolutely huge. And I really wish we had a whole nother call just to get into that one. But let me just say two things. Number one is it is a carbon problem. It is a public health problem. It is a water problem. It is a mudslides problem. I can keep going. It's a habitat problem. I mean, wildfire has about doubled in the Western US. And as a result of climate change, we've actually even been able to trace the change to the way climate is drying out our forests, making them tinder dry. And as I said, it's making them unhealthy, and then that opens them up to these explosive wildfires. So we have to change what we're doing because climate change has changed the game for our forests. They're actually out of sync with the climate. And so there are two ways we think about it. One is in the forests that we still have, the ones that haven't burned down, for example, like the campfire. It's about using science and climate science particularly to understand how many trees and what type of trees can survive on that landscape into the future. And in many cases, we just can't have as many trees per acre because, as I saw one of the questions that came in, because of water availability. There isn't as much soil moisture, not as much water availability. And so you actually can't literally have as many trees on some of these acres, and have them, be sustained and healthy, as well as even the way that fire passes through the landscape in some of these places. The clumping and spacing of the trees versus if they're overly dense has a big impact on how fire vulnerable they are. So in existing forests, it's about creatively using forestry to kind of reshape them and restructure them so that they're more wildfire resilient. But the huge opportunity that Joel spoke about, and that's why we got bipartisan support for this Replant Act to invest billions of dollars in post-fire reforestation, is it's both a tragedy to lose our forest to wildfire, but it's a chance to start over again. And so what we're doing in places like the Camp Fire in California, which was still the most destructive wildfire in California history, and in other places like this all across the West, is to use science to say, okay, instead of looking backwards and trying to replace the forest, how do we look forward and say, what kind of forest can survive on this landscape into the future based on the climate changes that are already in motion? And so what it tends to lead you to is a mixture of certain tree species that are there now, and genetic features of tree species that are there now, combined with things that we want to introduce into the landscape. And really importantly, not non-native species that we're pulling from other countries, but often it's tree species from other parts of the same state that are maybe hotter and drier, for example, or places, even the same tree species with slightly different genetic strains of those species, taking species that are from the southern end of the tree's range and starting to cultivate seeds and actually replant seedlings from those same ones in the northern edge of the range. So you're actually kind of planting more heat and drought resilient trees farther and farther north as you go forward. And so those kinds of forestry details in the post-fire reforestation can actually help us plant wildfire resilience from the start in these landscapes. And we think that's a really overlooked part of getting to greater wildfire resilience into the future. I mean, 20% of the West forests have burned in recent decades. And so we're gonna have a lot of this post-fire reforestation to do. And so it's actually an opportunity to kind of think our way into a smarter way to do it with reforestation.
Great, that was fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you so much. We really look forward to partnering with you and figuring out how we can work together and collaborate. I mean, it's particularly refreshing to hear someone from an organization other than ours talking about bipartisanship. Sometimes we feel like a lonely voice out on that sometimes, and also that your work helps communities that have been disadvantaged is also very heartening to hear. So please feel free to stick on for the next 10 minutes. We're going to go over a couple of things, but if you have to drop off, it's a Saturday afternoon, we understand. But thank you so much. That was fantastic.
Great. Thank you so much.
Sure. Great.
Thank you all.
Okay, so what are we inviting you to do this month? Well, first of all, it's action regarding the June conference. And so that's could be helping the people who already registered make sure that they can attend. Sometimes you fundraise for people, particularly young people, students, et cetera, people who are going for the first time. There's over 400 people who signed up to schedule appointments. And so if you could start to get those meetings organized, whether that's going to be actually on the Hill, I think more of them will be in district or virtual, but beginning to do the work for that also. And then a little bit later, I'll talk about the worldwide month of action that's happening in coordination also. Also plan your summertime campaign season and the different types of grassroots activities you can do over the course of the summer. On April 6th, our San Mateo County chapter sponsored a nonpartisan environment and climate candidate forum for the top contenders, 3 Democrats and 1 Republican, who was working to replace Jackie Speer, who they'd been working with for 10 years, who's retiring from Congress. The forum was offered by Zoom and registration was handled by Eventbrite. They recruited 3 local nonprofits to co-sponsor and invite people. They also got 12 local participating organizations to help to publicize it to their membership. Also, they did a lot of outreach to media, which ended up with 2 newspapers doing stories on the forum, and actually one of the TV stations, KTVU in San Francisco, doing a segment on their news channel. At the event, there was 145 people in attendance, and over 350 have viewed it since then. There was a brief introduction by one of their student leaders, and then people had submitted questions in advance to the moderator, and were able to do some additional questions on Zoom. The chapter leadership feels that sponsoring the forum was important in many ways. It established CCL as a significant entity within the local climate environment community. It established goodwill towards CCL as a provider of an important public service. And most importantly, it raised the visibility of CCL with whomever's elected to Congress in November. It also underscored climate change as a critical election issue in our district. And just so you know, if you're beginning to plan or you are planning an event like that, it took San Mateo about 3 months to put everything together to do that. And we're going to drop Brad Steele, the primary organizer's contact information in the chat. He is generally offered to answer questions that anybody has about how you might do that. So I just wanted to point to that as an example of one thing you might do. And congratulations to San Mateo for getting such a great turnout and such a great event. Okay, so I just want to point to a couple things, one that's coming up and one that are in process. One is on June 4th in West Virginia, they're having a West Virginia Faith Conference. So that's going to get dropped in the chat if you're interested. Our West Virginia volunteers just continue to be absolutely remarkable at trying to find additional ways to support and get Senator Manchin's support. So there's quite a few faith leaders who are speaking at it, and we're very excited about that event. Also in the Senate, the Kigali Amendment is getting growing bipartisan support. That's the amendment that supports the Montreal Protocol. Senate leadership has given us very specific language they would like us to use if you reach out to your senator. What they would like you to message is American competitiveness. They don't want you to talk about climate change. They want you to focus on American competitiveness. So if you choose to reach out to your senator about the support for the Kigali Amendment, please use the phrase American competitiveness somewhere in your messaging. Also, Citizens Climate International works on two fronts. One is we now have 134 chapters in 76 countries. So we continue to build and support chapters all over the world. But the other track that Citizens Climate International works on is the UN process. And one of the things that CCI has been doing is working hard to make that process more inclusive, more transparent, get more people in the room, basically. So what happens for a lot of countries is they don't have the wherewithal to put together a delegation to send, so they'll hire someone from another country to represent them. And what we want is that every country, for instance, when they're in Bonn this summer, they actually have their own representative. So what we've done is we've created a training program along with the Fletcher School of Management at Tufts University. And what we will be doing is training those delegates how to work in that issue. It's a complex process being at those COP events. So a lot of you have been to them, so you know how it is. And sometimes it takes the 2 weeks of the event just to figure out where to go and what to work on. So what we've done is we've created a program to train people, to figure out how to work inside the UN process, to learn how to be effective in those things, how to draw additional change to climate change. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm really thrilled that we're partnering with the Fletcher School of Management at Tufts. Okay. So first of all, before I get to the June conference, I want to mention that Neil Chatterjee, the former head of FERC, is our speaker for June. I suspect he knows something about energy transition. So that was a big coup, just like this month's speakers, Neil Chatterjee, former head of FERC. Okay, so I'm one of the people who is going to be going to DC. I have been double boosted along with getting the 2 original shots. I have my N95 masks. I'm going to be bringing tests with me. I'll be taking a test every day to make sure if I'm exposed, I'm not going to expose anybody else. We also have the room set up with round tables, so there'll be more space in between people than there's ever been at one of our conferences. And so I'm just telling you the precautions I'm taking. I'm hoping that everybody else is doing something similar to what I'm doing. I suspect we'll have between 500 and 600 people in DC, and that we'll have most of you viewing virtually. So there's a few features of the conference I want to point to. The first panel that has Nwandi Lawson and Amanda Ripley, they're going to talk to us about conflict. And in particular, Amanda Ripley's book about high conflict, she points to a conflict and says conflict itself is good. But when you get to the point of high conflict, it's not good, it's not healthy. It gets to the point where winning and losing is not enough. It is really about having to humiliate your opponents. So I suspect that we're going to learn more about the landscape that we're in now and how to be effective in that particular landscape. Also, both Alex Flint and Alex Bosmosky are speaking. Those are 2 of the cornerstones of the American eco-right. So if that's an area of interest to you, both of them will be speaking in different sessions. Senator Whitehouse's comments from the reception on Monday night will also be streamed. Given it's not always entirely predictable what time senators will show up at that event, if you miss the exact time at the reception, we will be recording that also. And then I want to mention one more speaker, Bill Shireman from In It Together. Mr. Shireman has been working for years to build a coalition of NGOs and organizations that want to bring solutions to the 70% of Americans that don't exist on either fringe. And so he believes there's a coalition there, and I think he's right, where we can start electing people who appeal to the center of American democracy, rather than just the far left or the far right. And I think that his comments will be interesting to you also. So for the first time ever, we will be doing not just a conference and lobby day, but a worldwide month of action. And people will be doing all kinds of things. So for instance, the Canadians had their conference last week. So they were on Parliament Hill last week. We'll report out on the details of that next month, because technically that was a May action. So they'll be doing something else. But all countries are being invited to join in. Now, I know that we look at our own situation and find it to have gotten increasingly difficult over the last several years. Well, in half the countries that we work in, they do not have functioning democracies, and in many cases are functioning under a corrupt autocrat. So what do they choose to do in the face of that? And it's something that is really, really hard and difficult and hard to figure out your pathway. They choose engagement. So just like you and I will be doing this June, our volunteers in the world will choose to engage on the subject, to make project, no matter how hard or easy it is. Okay, I want to thank Jad and Joel for joining us again. That was just a fantastic presentation. Thank you all for all you're doing. We'll see you on June 10th with Neil Chatterjee, and I will look forward to seeing whoever's able to make it to DC in June. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.